So the question then for the debate, so everybody can have a vote if they want, is Jake Paul versus KSI as serious for boxing as Mike Tyson's comeback? And I'm saying that it is, right? And I think I've got two key reasons for that. The first is that Mike Tyson's comeback will in fact is likely to only be exhibition only. And Jake Paul versus KSI will be a sanctioned professional bout. Now, Tyson last fought professionally in 2005 when he was defeated by Kevin McBride, and he lost to Danny Williams in 2004. Tyson is now 53 and has taken a 15-year break from pro boxing since he was 38. I mean, he was defeated by Buster Douglas in Japan 30 years ago. Now, some people would say, fine, but what about, George Foreman's comeback? But when Foreman beat Michael Moorer, he was 45. He was 8 years younger than Tyson, and he'd taken a 10-year break from boxing, but he took that break from 28 to 38. And he only won the world title 7 years after his comeback. So on similar maths, if Mike Tyson came back professionally now, he would win the world title at 60, which I have to say does seem, to me at least, unlikely. So what we're doing is we're comparing an exhibition match with a professional contest. And surely an exhibition match cannot be considered more serious for boxing than a professionally sanctioned event. And I can't believe that Tyson, however great he was, would get a license to fight professionally. I'd love to watch him fight professionally, but I don't want to see him knocked out by a younger, stronger man. And I would like to see a professional fight between KSI and Logan Paul, hopefully because KSI will beat him. So that's my first reason. The second reason is that Mike Tyson is really about the past, whereas Jake Paul and KSI are really about the future. So Jake Paul's 23, KSI's 26. And between them, they've got about 50 million followers on social media. And boxing desperately needs to sort of push off the challenge of UFC and MMA. I mean, UFC 249 happened last night behind closed doors, and world title boxing is nowhere to be seen. KSI Jake Paul will be picked up by DAZN, other broadcasters, support the ecosystem of boxing and the undercard fights that will be on there. So two reasons. Tyson was a primeval force of nature in the 80s, but Jake Paul versus KSI is more serious for boxing than Mike Tyson's comeback because it's a professional bout, number one, versus an exhibition match, and secondly, it's about the future and not about the past. So that's it from me.
Okay, you've given me a lot to work with. So basically, right, the problem here is context and perception. So I don't take either particularly seriously as a hardcore kind of boxing fan and journalist. But I think the problem you have is that while Mike Tyson coming back at 50 plus is a nostalgia trip both for him and for people that remember him in his prime, no one is expected to take it particularly seriously. And so for that reason, it's kind of okay. It fits in its own ecosystem outside the normal boxing mainstream that we're all used to. It's just a bit of fun, especially in the lockdown when we're all starved of boxing content, as I've found to my cost as well as other people. Also, if Tyson were to be matched appropriately, I would wager that the action and the technique on display would still be superior to KSI against Jake Paul, even at the age Tyson is now. We've seen him on the bags, we've seen him on the pads, and he's neither going to be the force of old, and no one expects him to be. But technically, he's going to be far ahead of those guys, regardless, because of all the years he spent in the gym. There's no way they can catch up to that now, and even now they're not training like full-time boxers. That's the thing. We're saying, yeah, it's not an exhibition; it's a sanctioned boxing bout. Sure, but they're not full-time boxers, are they? They've got their careers on YouTube and so on, various platforms, and that's their priority. They're not going to be in the gym 3 times a day doing their runs and everything else, let's be honest. And I've seen them both fight. I've seen KSI fight. I saw Jake Paul's last fight. And Jake Paul looked good by virtue of the fact that his opponent was absolutely terrible. Like, would have lost to any UK journeyman, Anderson Gibb. And that's not to be harsh on him. At what he does on YouTube, he's streets ahead of boxers. But he's not a boxer, So we can't take them particularly seriously. We can take them seriously if people continue to frame it as if it's a real boxing fight, and we should kind of compare it to even British title level fights or anything like that. Then it becomes a bit of a threat to how seriously boxing's taken by the wider sports loving community. But in terms of as a sporting contest or, going to see something that displays athleticism, and skill, regardless of how famous they are, how many followers they've got, how young they are in comparison to Tyson, they can't even hope to approach the athletic ability of Tyson or whoever he chooses to fight, even in an exhibition.
Yeah, but are you saying, Danny, that the professional sanction of the fight is worthless?
Not worthless, but I think it's skewed by the fact that a professional sanction of the fight makes it more sellable, and that's why it's being sanctioned. I don't think anyone considers it a true boxing contest in the same way they would, two guys fighting for an English title. And that would be generous to say they're approaching that sort of level anyway. I mean, area title level, they would both struggle.
So, and don't you think that the demographics that would appeal, that are attracted by the YouTubers, bring young people into boxing, whereas Mike Tyson, a great man that he is, appeals to guys like me, 50s, 60s and all the rest of it. And don't you think that in the end, if boxing can't attract a new audience, it will just wither on the vine, and UFC will take over?
No, basically, but for two reasons. One, I don't think we can discount the fact that Mike Tyson has inspired a generation of boxers to follow in his footsteps, and they will then inspire the next generation, in theory. But also, I think the whole YouTuber craze in boxing helps bring in a new audience. I think it's a fallacy. I think it's a soundbite that's been sold by people who want to make money from it, like the promoters who are putting it on and the broadcasters who are showing it. Well, I think people watch their fights because they want to follow their YouTuber heroes, regardless of what the sport is. I think if KSI and Logan Paul had a 10-pin bowling contest, I think people would tune in. Not as many, because it's not as visceral a sport as boxing, but I don't think people are going to stay and watch the likes of Vasyl Lomachenko or Terence Crawford because they've watched KSI and Logan Paul. I think it's two distinct audiences.
But why then would you think that DAZN would license the last fight between Logan Paul and KSI Logan Paul 2 alongside their Canelo licensing and everything else? Do you think they're just appealing to a totally different audience?
Yeah, I think it's a short-term play. I think they'll make a lot of money from it, from a different audience. And when the YouTuber craze dies down, and I don't mean overall, I mean as in relation to boxing, they'll have made their money, and they'll hope that the hardcore boxing fans, who they rely on to fund them over longer term, will forgive that kind of minor deviation.
But then, okay, how would you define a YouTube boxer? Because are you saying that Logan Paul isn't a proper boxer? Or Jake Paul isn't, even though they're professionally sanctioned?
Yeah, I would say that, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So I don't think either of them would have been granted a licence by the British Boxing Board of Control. They've got no amateur experience. They've got no one's been in to watch them kind of train and spar as the Board of Control used to do. They watch videotapes now, but similar thing. And I think they'd have found it very hard with no previous experience at the ages they are, and also not being able to commit full time to training, to be given licenses by the Board of Control. I think they found certain sanctioning bodies that are a bit more lenient and are happy to license them, and fair play to them. I hope they make as much money as they can. I hope they draw massive audiences. I've got nothing against them. I just don't think it can be considered on a par with boxing.
Fascinating. Well, enough from you and I. Let people have a vote and see what they think. All right. Thanks very much, Danny.
All right. Cheers, Peter. Appreciate it.